Wreckage drifted in all directions, pieces of shattered warforms tumbling through the void. Fires still burned where oxygen remained, casting brief flashes of light across the battlefield before vanishing into the abyss. The black ship held position at the center of the destruction, its hull scarred, its defenses barely holding together. Inside, alarms pulsed in erratic bursts. Damaged systems struggled to keep up with the demands of survival. Medbay overflowed with the wounded, some clinging to life, others already gone. A field technician knelt beside a failing power relay, fingers coated in grease and blood as they worked to stabilize the current. Another failure could cut life support in half the ship. There was no time to hesitate. A lone figure stood near a shattered viewport, staring at the remains of enemy vessels. The battle had been won, but the cost had been unbearable. Friends lost, entire squadrons wiped from existence. Victory meant nothing when the dead outnumbered the living. Deep in the ship's lower decks, scavengers moved through ruined corridors, stripping broken warframes for anything useful. Some of the enemy's technology still pulsed with energy, biomechanical limbs twitching even in death. The resistance had bled for this battle, but the enemy was not gone. Their retreat had not been a defeat, only a pause. A distant explosion rumbled through the ship. Another reactor surge. Engineers scrambled to contain it. Every survivor knew the truth. The war was far from over. The black ship still stood, but for how much longer? The wounded outnumbered the medics. Every step through the narrow corridors was met with the sight of bodies, some breathing, some not. Those still conscious clung to whatever strength they had left, gripping their wounds as if sheer willpower alone could hold them together. Automated med drones hovered above the injured, dispensing coagulants and stitching torn flesh with mechanical precision, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. A soldier, barely past their second campaign, sat against a bulkhead, staring at nothing. Their armor was cracked, blood seeped through the plates, but they weren't moving, weren't speaking. A medic knelt beside them, scanning vitals. The pulse was weak, but steady. Shock had taken hold. The fight had taken something from them that no amount of battlefield medicine could repair. Across the ship, the bridge was locked in silence. Displays flickered, struggling to process the aftermath. The resistance had won, but the cost had been staggering. Tactical officers combed through intercepted enemy transmissions, decrypting fragments of alien code in search of any hint of what came next. The enemy never retreated without reason. A veteran fighter leaned against a damaged console, staring at the scrolling data. They had fought in the first invasion, had seen the cities burn, had survived the extermination fleets. Every battle felt like a repetition of history, a cycle that never truly ended. They had joined the resistance not for revenge, not for redemption, but simply because there was nowhere else left to go. In the lower decks, scavengers picked through the remains of warforms, pulling apart biomechanical plating and salvaging energy cells still humming with residual charge. The enemy's technology was a fusion of organics and machine, and even in death, their constructs still twitched, still reacted. One scavenger reached for a shattered limb when the severed appendage jerked, fingers curling as if grasping for something unseen. They recoiled, instinct overriding curiosity. The enemy never truly died. Further down the corridors, a technician worked on a failing power conduit. The battle had left the ship's infrastructure hanging by a thread, and without stabilization, entire sections would be lost. Their hands moved with mechanical precision, rewiring systems on muscle memory alone. They had once been an engineer on a colony ship before the war. That life was gone now, buried under the weight of conflict. There was no returning to it, no future beyond the next battle. A low vibration pulsed through the ship's frame, the telltale sign of another failing reactor coil. Engineers scrambled, rerouting power, sealing off sections already too compromised to be saved. The black ship was holding together, but just barely. A distant alarm echoed through the lower decks. An anomaly had been detected. Sensors picked up something moving where nothing should be. A security officer checked the readings, frowning at the irregular signals. There were no life signs, no transmissions. Just movement. They activated a patrol unit, sending a small team to investigate. Weapons drawn, they moved through the dim corridors, past wreckage and fallen crew. The deeper they went, the more wrong everything felt. The air was still, the lights flickered in uneven rhythms, and then the sound. A low, rhythmic tapping against the metal walls. They stopped. Listened. The tapping ceased. The lead officer signaled a sweep formation, moving forward with measured steps. They reached an open maintenance hatch, its edges burned, warped. Something had forced its way inside. The officer motioned to one of the soldiers, who stepped forward, weapon raised. They peered inside. Darkness. Then movement. The officer barely had time to react before the soldier was pulled inside. A scream cut short. A burst of gunfire. Then silence. The resistance had won the battle. But something else had come aboard. The ship's corridors carried the weight of exhaustion. The battle was over, but the war still pressed against every breath, every movement. Crews worked in rotating shifts, repairing systems that barely held together. In the lower decks, where the main reactor's auxiliary power grid was failing, a group of engineers fought against time. Each pulse from the core sent a tremor through the ship, a warning that the next failure might be the last. Among them, a technician with cybernetic implants adjusted a control module, fingers moving with practiced efficiency. The implants were standard issue for resistance engineers, designed for precision work, but these were different, self-modified, illegal by old-world standards. The war had erased those rules, but habits from a lifetime of hiding still lingered. They had been a data thief before the invasion, a ghost in the system. Now, they were just another body trying to keep the black ship from falling apart. A sudden fluctuation in power sent sparks cascading from a nearby panel. They flinched but didn't stop. The system was misfiring, rerouting energy to an unauthorized source. Someone was drawing power from a restricted sector. They ran a diagnostic, tracing the interference to a forgotten section of the ship, a place sealed off long before they had come aboard. Above, in the command center, an officer monitored the ship's status. Reports of missing supplies, inconsistent sensor readings, and strange energy fluctuations had been increasing. They had dismissed them at first, chalked them up to post-battle damage, but now patterns were emerging. Something was wrong. They requested a recon team, but most of the security forces were occupied with internal repairs and medical duty. They would have to handle this with whoever was available. A small team was assembled: an officer, a technician, and 2 security personnel. They moved through the lower corridors, past flickering lights and exposed wiring. The deeper they went, the more the ship changed. The walls were damp, the air stale. There were no signs of recent crew activity, yet the interference continued. At the far end of the sector, a blast door stood partially open. It shouldn't have been. This part of the ship had been sealed after an incident long before the battle. The officer hesitated before signaling the team forward. They stepped inside. The room beyond was lined with old-world storage containers, their contents long forgotten. In the center, a console pulsed with an unfamiliar glow. The technician moved forward, scanning the interface. It wasn't part of the ship's mainframe. The technology was older, predating even the Resistance's occupation of the vessel. The officer circled the room, weapon raised. "Someone's been here recently," they muttered. A sound echoed from deeper within the space. A slow, deliberate movement. The security personnel raised their rifles, scanning the shadows. The technician accessed the console, bypassing security measures that hadn't been touched in years. The data inside was fragmented but clear enough to recognize. This section had been a research bay abandoned when the ship was taken. The Resistance hadn't been the first to use this vessel for war. Before them, another force had controlled it. And they had left something behind. A file decrypted on the screen, revealing schematics, experiment logs, and personnel records. One name appeared more than the others. It wasn't resistance. It wasn't enemy. It was something else entirely. Then the lights failed. The security team switched to night vision, sweeping the room. Movement in the corner. A shape that didn't match any known crew profile. The officer barely had time to issue a command before the first shot was fired. Something had woken up. And it had never been human. Power still fluctuating, the technician muttered, fingers flying over the console. This system isn't part of the main grid. Someone wired it separately. The officer tightened their grip on the rifle. You're saying this place has been running on its own? More than that. The technician's voice lowered, eyes locked on the decrypted files. It's been hiding. The security team shifted, scanning the shadows. The air here felt different, not in a way that could be explained, but in a way that pressed against instincts honed by years of survival. One of them exhaled slowly. I don't like this. The lights failed. Night vision flickered on. The room shifted into an eerie green haze. Shapes emerged where there should have been none. The officer raised a fist, signaling silence. Something moved. A scrape against metal. The technician swallowed hard. I think I tripped something. A figure loomed in the far corner, humanoid in shape but wrong in every way that mattered. It stood unnaturally still, yet there was a presence to it, like it was aware. Watching. The officer stepped forward, rifle trained. Identify yourself. No response. Another step. The thing didn't move. The technician's breath hitched as they read the final decrypted log. That's not a person. The figure moved. The first shot rang out, a bright flash cutting through the darkness. The thing twisted unnaturally, dodging in ways that defied physics. A second shot, then a third. Sparks erupted from its body, but it didn't fall. It lunged. The closest security officer fired point blank. The impact sent them both crashing into the wall. A sickening crunch followed, and then silence. The officer pulled the technician back. Run. They didn't need to be told twice. The remaining security officer laid down suppressive fire as they fell back through the corridor. The thing moved faster than it should, slipping through shadows, its form shifting in the flickering light. The officer slammed the emergency lockdown panel. The blast door groaned before sealing shut. Panting, the technician gripped the officer's arm. What was that? The officer's face was pale beneath the combat visor. Something that should have stayed buried. A distant thud echoed through the sealed door. Then another. Slow. Steady. The technician checked the decrypted file one last time. The name appeared again. A name older than the war. Older than the Black Ship. The pounding grew louder. Captain, the officer whispered into the comm, voice tight with something that hadn't surfaced in years. Fear. We have a problem. The emergency beacon flickered erratically, struggling against the power fluctuations. The officer's grip on the comm unit tightened. Command, do you read? We have an unidentified hostile in Sector 9. Repeat, hostile is not organic. Possible pre-resistance tech. Static. Then a distorted voice. Acknowledged interference. Patching relay. The technician wiped sweat from their brow, staring at the decrypted logs. This isn't just some malfunctioning AI. This thing was designed for infiltration. They tapped a fragment of recovered data. Biomorphic framework. Adaptive intelligence. It learns. The pounding on the blast door continued, but something changed. The impacts grew measured, precise. The officer exchanged a glance with the security personnel. It's testing the structure. The lights flickered again, and for a moment, the emergency system cycled down. A deep hum resonated through the floor panels. The technician swore. That's a remote override. It's trying to reroute command protocols. The officer pulled them back. Shut it down. I can't. Fingers moved frantically over the console. It's not hacking us. It's waking something up. A tremor rippled through the deck, a harmonic pulse that resonated with an unnatural frequency. Deep in the ship's subsystems, something ancient stirred. The security officer cursed under their breath. I don't like this. Neither do I, the officer muttered. We need out of here. Now. They turned just as the lights failed completely. Darkness swallowed them, absolute and suffocating. Then came the sound, not a growl, not static, but something in between. A reverberation of intent. The backup emergency system struggled to reignite, throwing up a ghostly blue luminescence that barely illuminated the room. In its glow, they saw movement. Not just beyond the door. Behind them. The technician barely had time to react before the shadows twisted, and something emerged from the walls. A figure, humanoid but shifting, like liquid metal wrapped in synthetic flesh. Its face was a mockery of human features, eyes too deep, too hollow, the suggestion of a mouth that never moved. The security officer fired. A direct hit. The round passed through, barely slowing the thing down before the wound sealed like rippling water. The technician choked on their own breath. It's using the ship's nano-repair systems, rewriting itself in real time. The officer didn't hesitate. Run. They bolted, skidding into the adjacent corridor as the blast door's emergency locks disengaged. The thing didn't follow immediately. It stood, watching. Calculating. Then it moved. Not fast, not slow, deliberate. Unrushed. As if it already knew how this ended. The officer barked into the command, lock down this sector now. The reply was garbled, but a different voice cut through. Negative. If we seal it, we lose containment protocols. There's more down there than just one. The technician's stomach dropped. How many? A pause. Then, unknown. But we just lost telemetry on sublevel maintenance grids. It's not alone. The officer clenched their jaw. Tell me you have a countermeasure. Silence. The thing behind them kept walking. The ship shuddered again, but this time, it wasn't an attack. Systems deep within the core were shifting. Rewriting. The black ship had always been an enigma, its origins buried under layers of conflicting history. But now, it wasn't just carrying the resistance. It was waking up. And something inside it was no longer human. The corridor stretched endlessly, the ship's failing lights barely casting enough glow to see more than a few steps ahead. The officer led the way, rifle raised, breath controlled. The technician followed, gripping a portable interface pad, desperately trying to regain control over the failing systems. The lone security officer took the rear, constantly glancing back at the thing that moved with patient inevitability behind them. The ship's tremors grew worse. Not from damage, but from something beneath the metal and circuitry. A shift in its structure. The black ship had always been a war machine, but now it was becoming something else. We need to reach a secured relay, the technician hissed. If I can isolate the corruption in the subsystems, I might be able to slow it down. Define it, the security officer muttered. The ship, the technician admitted. Something's rewriting it at the core level. I don't think these things were just locked away, I think they were part of it. A hollow screech echoed from the distance. Not the one following them. Another. Then another. The security officer cursed under their breath. More of them. The officer made a split-second decision. We're cutting through the auxiliary maintenance shaft. It leads to an emergency control hub. The shaft entrance was locked, but a manual override forced it open. They slipped inside just as another screech tore through the corridor behind them. The hatch slammed shut, sealing them in narrow, metal passageways built for drones and repair units rather than people. They moved fast, ducking under exposed conduits and sidestepping rusted pipes that pulsed with an eerie, biomechanical glow. The ship's transformation wasn't just a software rewrite. The black ship was physically changing. A deep hum resonated from below, vibrating through their bones. The technicians' fingers danced over the interface pad, running diagnostics. Their expression turned to one of horror. The ship's power core they swallowed. It's gone. The officer halted. What do you mean gone? I mean it's not where it should be. They turned the screen, displaying a schematic. Something moved it. It's been relocated to a substructure that isn't supposed to exist. The security officer shifted uncomfortably. This ship was built for war, right? No one actually knows how deep its systems go. The officer clenched their jaw. We're finding out the hard way. Another tremor. This time, it wasn't just the ship, it was them. Gravity itself flickered for a fraction of a second, as if something had rewritten the fundamental physics of the space around them. The sensation passed quickly, but the implication remained. The technician paled. That wasn't an anomaly. It was a test. A theory was forming in their mind, one that sent ice through their veins. The black ship wasn't just housing these creatures. It had been designed to contain them. But now, containment was breaking, and something deeper in the ship had noticed. Then came the twist. The interface pad flashed with an override request, an unknown entity attempting access. The technician barely had time to react before a voice, artificial yet ancient, crackled through their comm units. Designation recognized. Clearance accepted. System override engaged. The ship lurched. The passage around them shifted. Metal twisted, reshaping into something smooth, unfamiliar. Walls that had once been solid became semi-translucent, revealing veins of unknown energy pulsing beneath. The officer's breath hitched. It's responding to us. The security officer took a step back. I don't like how that sounds. The technician's mind raced. If the ship had accepted their presence, it meant one thing: it was still running its original protocol. Whatever the resistance had done to retrofit it for battle, those changes were being overwritten. And if that was the case... We're not passengers, the technician whispered. We're intruders. A new sound filled the corridor. A rising tone, deep and resonant. A countdown. The officer turned sharply. What did you do? I didn't do anything. The technician frantically scrolled through data. Something inside the ship just reactivated an old failsafe. The security officer exhaled sharply. A failsafe for what? The technician met their gaze, the answer heavy in the air. For us. The black ship had awakened. And now, it was deciding what to do with them.